Welcome this afternoon, and thank you for joining us all for this afternoon's webinar. As you've probably noticed, there's only one picture on your screen today, so unfortunately for the next period of time, you've got to put up with me and me only. So today, I'd really would love that if you've got any questions or any comments, you can either use the chat room or just unmute yourself and butt in. I can handle being butted in on as we talk through some of the stuff that we're going to cover today. So please feel free to be as interactive as you'd like to this afternoon. Today I'm sort of really going to spend a bit of time running through what's actually going on in the marketplace. What are some of the key drivers? What are some of the indicators that we're seeing, so that you can get an idea of what's going on. And then I'm going to jump into some stuff around the ATO and the use of the MyGov portal and DPN things. But we'll start with a little bit about what's going on around the place. As the press would, if anyone reads any type of the Accounting Daily or normal online press, there's certainly no shortage of talk about insolvency. As it turns out, March is another record month in insolvencies. They had somewhere in the vicinity, or just over 1,200 insolvency events in the month of March alone. Now, to give you some idea of how that's increasing, in February, there was 967 insolvency events, and in January, it was 555. So we've nearly had a 100% increase in 2 months. Now, it's a nice headline thing to say 100%, but in fairness, not a lot happens in January because the courts are shut for a little while and a lot of people on holidays. So historically, January has always been a quiet month in the insolvency world. But to have over a doubling of insolvency events in 2 months is a pretty significant. And I think what I personally think is a little bit scary about the whole thing is that we're now starting to hear a lot more people talk about it being a part of the cost of doing business. That we are going to have to deal with insolvencies and insolvency events. We're all going to have customers that will go insolvent, and that's now a cost of doing business, which is another cost that I'm quite comfortable that most of our small business owners that we all look after have not put into their cost base because they're worried about getting jobs. And if anything, they're still actually, we're seeing a little bit too much of people still actually trying to reduce prices to buy a job. So it is a really interesting time from that point of view. The other thing that's been in terms of where the insolvencies are occurring, one of the easiest ways to have a look is through the credit defaulting reporting and that the ATO now has. Credit reporting is for any debts over 100,000 that the ATO believes they're not engaging with, and I'll talk about what engaging is a little bit later. But 23.8% of all of the credit defaults issued by the ATO are currently sitting with the construction industry. So that's probably no surprise for most of us. We all know that construction is certainly copping the most grief at the moment. But what I did find interesting in that stat is of that 23% of the construction industry, over 2/3 of that is actually coming from the residential construction market. So the real risk and danger areas at the moment are in the residential construction, more so than even some of the bigger stuff. So that's been a big part of it. The second highest credit default area actually is professional services. And then the other one that would not be unsurprising, well, that isn't unsurprising, is hospitality and retailer coming in third on the customer defaults. Now, they probably would normally sit higher than that, but being 100,000 debt is a starting point, may be a reason why some of the small hospitality doesn't hit that type of record. So there's no doubt. And I don't pretend to be an economist, and I don't pretend to understand how everything's going to flow over the next couple of years. We've got enough trouble just trying to understand the insolvency world. But there's no doubt that we're in for a bit of a ride. But more importantly, I think the ride that we're in, regardless of the rest of the macro environment that we're seeing with interest rates and cost of living, inflation rates, and all the rest of it, is that we've got a period of time now over the last 4 years where the ATO has actually been so pleasant and nice to people that there is a real fear that they've actually become too nice and people just aren't paying their debts. And I'll talk more about that as we actually, the tax commissioner spoke about that a little bit later. I'll go through that shortly. To give you an idea of where the ATO fits in the marketplace at the moment, wind-up applications in February from the ATO were 62. Wind-up applications from the ATO in March increased to 124. Now, that was out of about 500 wind-up applications that were issued. So about 25% of what's driving it at the moment is the ATO. And I still believe that that's quite a low number compared to where they normally are. And to bring that into perspective, I think one of the really important things is, the ATO, one of the tax commissioners actually did a speech in about September, October, and talked about what their plan was. And I sort of want to talk a little bit through to that. We have had a number of people join since I first said it. So I'll just take 2 minutes and just remind everyone that you've only got me today. I don't particularly, I know none of you will like a monologue from me for 45 minutes. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put stuff in the chat or just unmute yourself and we can, and then you can interrupt me. So please feel free to do that. I'd like this to be as interactive as we possibly can, although I know not a lot of people like to talk in these open group forums. So just going back to the tax commissioner, you had a speech in about August or September last year, and he talked about obviously where the collection cycle was. The small business market, which is what most of us here spend our lives looking after, is certainly overrepresented in some of the bad indicators from the ATO. Again, you would have seen in the press a whole range of different numbers of what the ATO is owed. According to these numbers, it's about $45 to $50 billion is owed in collectible debt. Of that, 33 billion of it is small business, is attached to what the ATO deemed to be small business. Now, what's a little bit more interesting in that is that of that 33 million, 2/3 of that is coming out of the activity statements. So about $22 billion is tied to the activity statements that are being issued. Now, what's really interesting is Australia, as a tax-paying nation, rate as one of the highest of good compliance of paying their taxes as and when they fall due across any country on the planet. So we've historically been extremely good. Up to 80 to 85% of all tax debts are paid on time, up until pre-COVID. And that's been something that the ATO has spoke about, is how good we are as a nation in paying our bills. However, what's come about, and I think it's easy how quickly we can forget that it's we've been going through this, coming out of the whole COVID cycle, if you want for a better word, for nearly 4 years ago now. I started doing these webinars when COVID started, and our first webinar was actually in April 2020. So 4 years ago today, we started 4 years ago this month, we started running these, and it was only on the back of that lockdown. So what's happened in that 4 years, though, and this is according to the commissioner, is that the culture of paying our tax bills has changed significantly. Because they put so much relief and allowed so much leniency through the whole period, through this last 4 years, there is talk that the culture of paying our bills has actually gone out the door, particularly when it comes to the ATO, because the ATO has been so lenient. So the Commissioner was saying in this statement that one of their main drivers at the moment, apart from actually collecting the tax debt and getting any extra cash in for the government that they can, one of the other main drivers is to try and drive back the better culture of making our payments on time. Now, to do that, they need to go back to their full collect out ability and chasing people. So this whole lack of payment culture is something that is driving the ATO to really push to get the numbers back up, to get payments in, or to get people gone. I'm sure many of you have heard the ATO in various statements talk about the fact that they believe that they're an important part of the cycle of ensuring that those businesses that aren't paying don't get a competitive advantage over those that do pay, and they take that very seriously at the same time. So they come back to, and we've all, there wouldn't be anyone listening that hasn't heard their comment about that you need to engage with the ATO. What's really interesting is what they deem as engaging. So what the Commissioner has said is that engaging with the ATO and making sure that you're talking to the ATO when you're having issues with payments is that you need to be talking to them before the due date of the debt, not after you've lodged it and when they chase. So his comment verbatim was that early means before the due date. For those that await for us, the ATO, to call, will have a very different experience. And I think what I'm trying to, I guess, a little bit highlight, and I don't think any of you don't know this, what I'm trying to do is try and give you a couple of figures and numbers and comments that you might be able to use when talking to one of these clients that are being a little bit recalcitrant. Is that the experience now that the ATO is going to say is going to be very different if you're not talking to them before the debt's even due to say that you've got a problem. So it's certainly a really strong and heavy focus that's leading towards trying to drive this change in payment culture and get people back into making payments. Now, I've mentioned before that the ATO is certainly increasing their activity. And I'm not doing this because I'm going, oh, the whole world's going to end. It's just we're trying to get understand so that when you're talking to your clients, just that there isn't the grace that's going to exist anymore. The ATO in 2019, in January to June, issued 950 wind-up applications in that 6-month period. To give you an idea of where they're at in terms of getting back to that normal payment cycle, in 2023, in the same period, January to June, there were only 478. Now that's near on, we're right in the middle of 12 months ago now. The stats for this year are starting to look like it's, for the first quarter of that 6-month period, we're probably still only sitting at about 300, maybe 400. So we're, although that's not an official number, so we're not quite back up to that really driving level of windups that the ATO think is normal. And I think there's a significant amount of overflow that will come through as well. So I think we've got a lot more of the ATO driving. Now that takes time for it to come through the system. A couple of months ago, I brought up in one of the webinars about there was a really high claim process going on in the courts, statement of claims and all the rest of it. Just remember that the ATO doesn't need to do that, particularly for corporate debt. Because we're a self-reporting nation, when we submit our BAS, that's deemed to be correct, unless they audit it and find something else to do. But again, that's a whole different story. But what it does mean is that they can go straight to a creditor stat demand. Now that takes time in the process. The creditor stat demand itself is only 21 days, but like any big organisation, it takes time to push that through the process. So I don't think we're at the real peak yet. And if the ATO is only half what it was pre-COVID, and they're spruiking that they want to go back to normal payment collection cycle, we've got quite a bit of an uplift still to come and head our way. So again, this is just a reminder for those who have clients with their tax debt out there, that it's really important that people are aware that the gloves are off, that they will get chased at some point. I think the only thing that's saving some clients over others is that the pile must be pretty high on every person's desk of which file they're going to deal with next. I use the metaphorical list. You have your pile of files, yeah, and you take one from the bottom and you add more to the top. Well, I think there's still more being added to the top than have been taken from the bottom at this stage. So on that note, what I wanted to do, because I've had a number of questions from various referrers around the country about looking for it and trying to allow people to see what's going on. So if you've got a client that does have an outstanding tax debt, there's a lot of issues around DPNs being issued to the wrong areas and all that sort of stuff. But now in the world of MyGov, and I might have taken me a while to get onto it, but I now think it's a really cool idea, is that the MyGov actually gives your clients, and I'm not saying it's something that you guys can do as referrers. There's significant amount of work if you were going to check everyone's MyGov or accounts on a regular basis. But if you have a client who has outstanding debt, then it might be worth reminding them to go into their MyGov once a week. So what I thought I'd do today, if I can make technology work, and with my grey hair, most people will have a laugh about me using technology. But if I can, what I want to do is, can everyone see that, the account summary page? Just someone nod their head who's still got their camera on. Neville? All right, hopefully you can all see that. I can't quite see if anyone's complaining about not being able to see it. All right, so if you have a look at this, when a client comes into their MyGov and particularly goes into their ATO section, yeah, that's going away now. When they go into the ATO section of their MyGov, if they go to the accounts and payments area, click on the down arrow, they can get an account summary. And this is what it will come up and look like. Now, I'll go through why this particular client has got the accounts that they have, but it just for all of you to have a look at, it gives you a really clear picture of what's going on with this client. Now, if you've got it, there was an initial, I think it's something like 400,000 for this client, or 500,000, which is overdue. The accountant had mentioned to her that she should check on MyGov, and then coming into here, you can see that there are direct penalty notices for both superannuation, PAYG, and GST. Now, if you just stopped at this screen, you would think that this lady, this director, is already on the hook for all of this money. Now, it's not quite as simple as that, because one of the really big things that's in favour of people in this current world is that we're actually getting access to when the ATO is chasing someone a whole lot earlier than we ever have had before. Now, to show you that, I'll just get rid of that screen. Look at me. Bring up that screen. Now, this is a different client account. I haven't drilled into the same summary pages that you were looking at before, but this is if you clicked in on, say, the GST tab. What you'll see, or call it the PAYG tab, because this is all about PAYG, this one. So with this client, what's happened is that you'll see two really important dates now, and that is this process date and the effective date. And I apologise for those who are listening who know more about this already, but the amount of calls I get of people who don't fully understand it, I figured it was worth talking about. So what's really interesting is that if you have a look at this client, he was on the process date, the 28th of February, a new director penalty notice was issued on his account. The important thing, though, is that the effective date is not until the 26th of March. Now, most of you would have remembered from listening to me before about director penalty notices only being 21 days. But here we've got almost an extra week up our sleeve if someone was checking the account relatively regularly. So in this particular case, this client was checking their account particularly regularly. And then this came to light pretty much on the 28th, it might have been the 29th that we actually saw it, knowing that we had a direct penalty notice coming. Now, originally at that point, the ATO can issue it on the account of the client, but they haven't actually issued the direct penalty notice. So we couldn't get access to the actual direct penalty notice. But we knew that one was coming, but we didn't know whether it was lockdown or non-lockdown at this point. So just something for you to have a look at. If you do remind clients to go and have a look, this will help you understand what's going to happen in there. Now, in this particular case, I'll bring up, that's right, shared that. In this particular case, this screen. So this was the director penalty notice that was related to that last detail that we saw. So now what's interesting about that, you'll see there that the issue date is the 4th of March. Now, it was issued on his portal on the 28th of February. So there's a 6-day window before the issue date even starts that gives both the client, potentially advisors like myself, and obviously advisors like yourselves to get a head start on what's going on. So now I'll talk you through the DPNs because there are a couple of different types. In this particular case, once the DPN became available on the portal, as it turned out, the address that they had was not one that our client would have received it from, but that's a whole other issue that we'll leave for another day. So what we're seeing, what there are is that there are a couple of things about director penalty notices. In the last couple of years, they've moved from having one director penalty notice to 3 now. So you'll have one for superannuation guarantee, you'll have one for PAYG, and you'll have one for GST. So normally if one is issued, you'll have all 3 issued at the same time. Now, what's important if a client sends you one of these is understanding what type you've got. So in this particular case, you've got ones where we've only got the 3 columns. The one that's of relevance is this is the amount that the commissioner believes is unpaid of the company liability, and they're trying to issue this against the director personally. You will see on occasion, it doesn't happen, it does happen in some cases. You'll see here that there was a payment made, the amount on the activity statement was 7.2, the amount that the commissioner believes is unpaid is 2.2. Our client had made a payment of $5,000 and they'd allocated against that one. And the same thing happened on this one in April to June. But what's important is under this column, the ATO clearly states that the penalty in respect to the unpaid amount of the above table can be remitted within 21 days if one of the 4 things happens. 4 things is one's paid. Obviously, there's no debt if you pay it. If you appoint an administrator, appoint a small business restructuring practitioner, or you put the company into liquidation. Now, the important thing to note, well, a couple of things to note here. One is payment plans do not remit. For anyone who's listened to me before, I've probably said it and you've heard it before, but you can enter into a payment plan, no problem at all. But the director will still become personally liable for that debt, even if you enter into a payment plan. So please be really careful not to give the inference that you're making it go away. Now, if the payment plan completes and everything's paid out, no problem at all because the debt's gone. But if they default on that payment plan, we've seen in the last 12 months a number of clients come back going, you told me to go away, and it hasn't. It used to be an option. It used to be an option probably going back 7, 8 years ago, but they've removed that as a form of remittance. So please be really clear about that. So in this particular case, if this client, when he did he didn't have the ability to pay it, so let's put that one aside. If this client went into liquidation prior to the expiry of this notice, which is 21 days after that, the 25th of March, then all of this debt would go away and it wouldn't become a personal liability of the client. The debt still stays with the company, obviously, and that's dealt with through the liquidation, but the ability for this to become personally liable goes away at that point. Now, I'll get rid of that one and show you the other form of DPN. There. Okay, so you might remember in the when I first started putting up the screens, we had the general account. This is the same client who had the general account. You'll see here the date of issue of this one is the 8th of April. So this is actually a live one. At the moment, it's only 10 days old as a director penalty notice. So we've got till the 29th to deal with it, and I'll talk about how we're dealing with this one. But what's really interesting in this one is that it's slightly different to what you saw before. There's a couple of extra columns. So you've got the same two that we talked about before, what was on the activity statement, what the commissioner believes is still outstanding. And you'll see there that there's a slight discrepancy there because there's been some money paid on it or some allocation that's occurred. The important part, however, is columns 4 and 5. So column 4 is that it believes that the ATO was notified before the end of the 3 months from its due date, which means that the blue section, which is what we spoke about before, going into administration, small business restructure, or winding up the company, will mean that column 4 amount of money will actually not become a personal liability. But this one also shows one where they believe it was notified after the 3 months, was not notified on or before the 3 months. So this is what they call, you'll hear a lot of people call it a lockdown director penalty notice. And that applies to this separate paragraph, which basically says that in respect to the unpaid amount in column 5, there will be remitted within 21 days of this notice. The company complies with the obligation. So the only way to get out of that one is to pay it. So that 10,000, no matter what we do with this client, that 10,000 is on their account personally. Now I'll see if I can quickly go back to it. Yep. So you'll see here, so this is the same client. That's the GST director penalty notice that I was just showing you. It's showing a total of $47,000. Now, I can tell you that this client's actually gone into liquidation, and that debt has been, and we've now dealt with that. However, this was actually only taken, I think it was yesterday or the day before. So although the company's gone into liquidation, the portal is still showing, or the MyGov account is still showing that debt. But what will happen in due course is that 47 will be reduced down to just the 10,000 that we're talking about there. So the others will come off. So when you look at these accounts, it's important to understand that not all of it actually may already be a personal liability. It may become a personal liability, but it may not be there at this point. So hopefully that gives all of you a little bit of insight into how to, one, use it for your clients to help them get a better understanding, and probably more importantly, when they call you up going, what's this number? Hopefully it can give you a little bit of insight as to understand how they come about. What's but I think the big thing for me is trying to, if you run newsletters or you run some type of mail out that goes out to your clients, I'd highly recommend that if you've got client that you just sort of tell them about the MyGov. We had a client recently who didn't have their MyGov set up properly, and it took nearly a week for them to get access to it. And then we found a director penalty notice in there. So it's might be something worth putting in your newsletters or however you communicate with your clients to remind people to get their MyGov set up and to get their ATO attached to it correctly. So that, and then if they have outstanding debt, that they keep an eye on it on at least a weekly basis to give them a heads up to try and stay ahead of the game. One of the things with the director penalty notices, I think in the last 12 months, I don't think I've ever seen as many director penalty notices allowed to expire as we've had recently in this last 12 months. Normally, a director penalty notice would have people running in the door to try and deal with it before it became a personal liability. But when you have a combination of this change in payment desire of paying the ATO because they think that they're going to be generous, and what has been the case for the last 12 months is plenty of money in the market for people to borrow, we're finding that a lot of people are going, oh, no, that's okay, I'll let it expire because I'm going to handle it. And this year, what we're now seeing is that we're having a lot of clients coming back going, oh, I can't pay the debt. And then we're finding that we've got all these expired director penalty notices, and we're now having to consider personal insolvency a lot more than we ever needed to do in the past. So I hope that gives some insight into things. You've all been very quiet this afternoon, but if you've got any questions or any comments, you want to ask about any of the process, please feel free to jump in now, anytime. Happy to have to answer any questions that you might have along the way. The other thing just to keep in mind with the ATO is that you will generally find that they'll issue the director penalty notices before they issue a creditor stat demand. They'll try and get the director on the hook first, and then follow through. If they don't get paid through the director penalty notice, then they'll follow through with the creditor stat demand. Although I had a client come in about 3 weeks ago who got issued director penalty notices and a creditor stat demand on the same day. So they're certainly pushing the barrows now to get things rocking and rolling and trying to either get collected or get a company gone. And I want to be clear, they don't care if the company goes or gets paid. They just want one of the two things to happen. Again, we've had a lot of clients coming and go, surely they want the money if we can pay it over time. No, at the moment, they just want the accounts either closed or paid. And that's certainly, I think when you put a lens over it from the point of view that the ATO is trying to change this payment culture, you can understand why they may be doing that. Look, if there's no questions, I'm not going to hold you on for longer than we need to. So if no one has anything or any comments or any questions about any of what I've talked about, then I'll wrap it up and let you all go and finish your lunches or get on with your afternoons as best you can. I'll get Jazz to put up the what do they call it, the poll, where you get to assess me. And I thank you all. Excuse me. I thank you all again for joining us. I know it's been a bit hard having to listen to me for 35 minutes non-stop. I blame you guys for part of that because you didn't interact, but no, no, that's just my joke. We'll have some speakers back again next month, hopefully with some, I'm pretty keen to try and get someone to come and talk about the AI world and what's happening in that and how it might be useful to us all. and trying to get some of the tax specialists in as well. So thank you all for joining me. It's been it's always a pleasure. 4 years now for some of you have been putting up and coming and listening every month. So it's certainly been a new thing for me to get into this whole world 4 years down the track now. So thank you all. Look forward to seeing you all next month. We'll get the invites out as soon as we can. We normally would have this next week, but that's Anzac Day, and I think Anzac Day is a whole lot more important than listening to our webinar. But thank you for joining us. Have a great day, and we'll see you again all soon.